the third question. I'm not sure we're going to have time for the fourth one, but we may do. Which is linked to the Islamic ideologies, the impact of Ansar Allah and the growth of Salafism. I think who is going to, Laurent is going to lead on this with Manuel, I think.
Just a broad issue might be that over the last years we've sort of lost sight of what was actually happening with Islamist groups, at least as researchers. I mean, there might be some kind of a non-public research or expertise being published or being made accessible, but in a way, interest for these groups has sort of disappeared, both because there was difficult access to it and because Yemenis themselves were in a way preoccupied by other developments. Were the Houthis to retreat a bit, would peace be considered a feasible horizon? What would happen to this ideological dimension, which of course is problematic because it has considerably polarized the religious field, and I think that many Yemenis feel that and resent that and consider that this is problematic because it parts from what they themselves project as the history of Yemen, which was one of some form of coexistence. When it comes to the other groups, I don't know. Maybe Manuel can jump in, and then I'll see if I have things to add.
I'll just highlight. Thank you, Laurent. Thanks very much. Good to see you again. I think I'll just highlight a couple of interrelated trends that I've been observing in the course of primary research in Yemen over the past couple of years that I think link very clearly to some of the key points that Laurent and I made in the chapter about Yemen's Sunni Islamist groups. I think more broadly, there has been a transformation and also fragmentation of the Sunni Islamist field in Yemen, largely as a result of the conflict, and in great part has a direct response to the Houthi threat and offensive, to Hezbollah, to the Salafis, and also to the violent Islamist organizations such as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Daesh, of course. I think certain dynamics were already there prior to the conflict. For example, the politicization of the Salafi circles, but I think the conflict has accelerated this trajectory. The militarization of both Islam and the various Salafi groups is naturally the defining outcome, I think, of this transformation. I mean, in the case of Islam, which were really targeted by the Houthis prior to the conflict, and at the beginning of the conflict, they militarized and created militias through circles loyal to General Ali Mohsen al-Ahmar, and also linkages to militant groups. And in the case of the Salafis, many took up arms across Yemen. Various Salafi militias emerging, and the main parties to the conflict also co-opting these fighters to their ranks to join the anti-Houthi war effort. And this whole process, I think, has blurred the lines between Salafi militias and Salafi jihadists, and especially Al-Qaeda. So I think this process of militarization has been accompanied by all the grievances that a conflict such as Yemen's generate, and sectarian outlook as well towards the Houthis. So one can certainly talk also about a process of radicalization as well, almost as an inevitable outcome of these dynamics. I would just emphasize that, again, based on primary research conducted in Yemen over the past 2 years, clearly economic incentives trump ideological motivations as a driver of recruitment in the conflict. and ideological motivations, I think, declined for many Yemenis who have been disillusioned with the war and with the corruption of all the warring parties. And hardliners, be it on the Houthi side or on the Salafist Sunni extremist side, are comparatively few, but they are powerful and they are influential. So just to finish, with regards to the violent extremist organizations, I think since the open conflict that emerged in 2018 between Daesh and Al-Qaeda, especially in Al-Baida, both organizations seem to be on the decline, as a result of multiple factors, including fragmentation, again, splinter groups, the co-optation from other groups fighting in the conflict, and so on. Their number of operations, online communications, etc., has dropped significantly, but again, this dormant state of the violent extremist organizations, I think, does not reflect the incidence of extremist ideology and sentiment on the ground. And so the question is, what's going to happen, in my view, to all of these militia and Salafi fighters once the main parties to the conflict, once the main parties to the conflict agree on some sort of understanding? And for example, another related question is, what is the impact of funding shortages as a result of COVID-19 on the way that all these groups, the Islamist militias, the Salafi militias, the violent extremist organizations are currently looking? I am skeptical of, just to finish off, sorry, I'm really skeptical of the potential of mediation to reach any sort of coexistence between the Houthis on one hand and the more hardline Sunni groups. I see this particular conflict almost as something that will become, or has already become, kind of a structural characteristic of the conflict, and should outlive, I think, any kind of top-down peace agreement.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Yes. Would anybody like to comment on that?
It's something I observed with a lot of people, and well, thank you. A really good presentation. But it's why always people refer to Salafis as Sunni extremists, but when they refer to Houthis, they say hardliners. I find that biased. Yeah, why people always talk about Sunni extremism, but when it comes to Shia, they don't want to say extremism. So I just want to, say that. You can go.
I was going to ask Luca, if you could talk about the way Ansar Allah's ideology is likely to evolve in the future, especially if there is going to be an increase of Salafist ideology in, the traditional non-Zaidi parts of Yemen.
Yes, of course. And also to reply perhaps to the observation of Nadwa, which is correct. Perhaps when it comes to Houthi ideology, the ideology is so multi-layered that it's difficult to reduce it to a religious ideology. So what I was saying before, I think it's quite accurate. A number of people in northern Yemen are supporting the Houthis because of their political ideology, because of the way they are framing their anti-imperialist narrative, because of the way they are opposing what they call the aggression. And this is one level. On this level, the Houthis are basically a populist movement with some political goals that are shared by other populist movements across the globe, like curbing corruption. And this is one thing. And the public discourse of the Houthis very often is focused only on this political narrative. So they talk about the aggression, they refer to the Jews and the Christians and the infidels, but also within this broader framework of opposing the US and Israel. And this is one thing, this is a public discourse. But then you also have an esoteric discourse within the Houthi movement. And that esoteric discourse, at times, it's almost a takfiri discourse. I've observed during the years the Houthis considering other Muslims as kuffar, infidels, just because, for instance, they are not praying the way the Zaidi believers are praying in northern Yemen. And this is something that is that is shared by the hardliners or the extremists within the Houthi movement. It's not shared by all the people who are supporting the Houthis. And this is because a number of people are just supporting the Houthis because of their political ideology. Very often, the connection between the Houthis and 12-er Shia is emphasized. And I think this could be somehow misleading because several religious principles that the Houthis are trying to enforce in northern Yemen right now, and that are rightly considered repressive by the population, are not necessarily linked with 12-er Shia. And there's quite a lot of propaganda going on that side, while instead, for instance, forbidding music during the weddings, insulting the companions of the Prophet, the Sahaba, or for instance, the norms and the restrictions on gender mixing, they are not necessarily linked with the 12-er Shia, but they are in a sense indigenous also to a certain trend of the Zaydi school. This said, we are observing right now that the Houthis are trying to strengthen the religious side of their ideology on the internal side. And of course, a clash with the Salafis or with Islah could emphasize these religious aspects. It's easy to remember that even back in 2012, 2013, 2014, they advanced from the north with the excuse of fighting Sunni extremism. And so during that period, they also emphasized this kind of religious narrative.
Thank you. Ahmed, sorry.
Thank you so much for the point about the ideology of the Houthis, because I think it's not easy actually to understand the whole formula about the Houthi ideology, because they started actually with different grievance, with different ideology at the beginning. And I was looking, actually, this is in 2018, I interviewed so many Houthi leaders when I was in Sana'a. And some of them were from the Shabab al-Mu'min school. And what I noticed that there's a kind of evolution among the Houthi movement. It started, as Nadwa mentioned, from the Jarudi Zaydis, not from Zaydi school only, because there are so many branches actually. They have Jarudiyas, Zaydi, and they have Sulaymaniya, which is, has so many links with the Shawkani school. But they are coming from Jarudiyya school, which has so many links with Imamate family and the Shia 12ers school as well. Then they started in 2004 as they are just Zaydi school, and they have this kind of grievance. Then when they became larger, they started talking. This is throughout the sixth round of conflict in Yemen between 2004 and 2010. They started talking about, we are, we have grievance because we were overlooked and we are marginalized. Then when they took over Saada, they started talking on behalf of Saada. Then they started talking about the position of being a political entity in Yemen, and they want to have this kind of position. And I think this kind of multi-identities make us losing in which position or in which category we should put the Houthi movement. And today they are talking about we are the real representative of the country. And if you just read the national vision of the Houthis, where they put their vision about how they can end conflict in Yemen, they speak, frankly, we are the representative of Yemenis, and even the local parties in Yemen, they are just a part of the Saudi-led coalition military campaign. And we cannot actually deal with them as just local groups. And this is actually something need to be understood. The second point related to how we can understand the interplay between the Houthis and Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And I think in this point specifically, we need to redefine the mutual or common ground between the two groups, we always actually classify them as enemies. And this is true actually. But if you go deeply, they are partners because the existence of the first party is fueling the existence of the other. And this is actually something need to be understood. And the second point related to why people joined Al-Qaeda, for instance. I was in some districts in Al-Baida in 2013, and somebody told me, look, there are so many people who joined Al-Qaeda not because they are convinced about Al-Qaeda ideology, but it's the only way they take revenge. And I think we need to understand the rule of long-standing grievances here and why people actually join Al-Qaeda and how they perceive this kind of conflicts. The third point related to Salafis, and I think here we need to understand that there are lots of divisions within the Salafis. Yeah. Today we have Salafis who are with the Emiratis, Salafis who are with the Saudis, Salafis who are fighting in the line of the Islah party, and we have Salafis who are in the line of the Houthi movement. The political advisor of Mahdi al-Mashab is Muhammad An'am, who is a leader in the Rashad party, Salafi leader. And we have also the Ma'bar Salafi school. It is in the line of the Houthis. I mean, we cannot actually categorize the Salafis. And the last point related how the transformations of conflict is bringing actually different narratives. Today, when we look at this kind of transformation, there is a kind of liquid loyalty, liquid alliances. So in some areas, for instance, people actually became less religious and more talking about nationalism. And we have seen actually so many movements talking about these kind of identities. And we have also seen some Salafis and some people who were more conservative talking today about nationalism and their conflict with the Houthi movement. And I think these kind of points need to be taken into consideration when it comes to interplay between the different ideological groups in the country.
That was fascinating. I think Ibrahim and Laurent, did you want to come in? Laurent, please.
Thanks, Ahmed, for the comments. I really think it's important that we actually consider that I mean, grievances go both ways. If we're willing to consider the fragmentation also of the opponents of the Houthis, we need also to integrate that there can be potentially fragmentation within the Houthis. Currently, these do not appear, because I think there's this kind of rally around the flag which is happening, and they as we say in French, they have wind in their wings, huh? So I mean, as time goes by, they appear to be stronger and stronger, and I think this is something which is appealing. But it should not, in a way, not make us forget that also things are not as ideological as we think they might be. They might be linked also to sort of grievances, which have built up over the years and which can develop and re-emerge, quite rapidly. And I think this will be important also to sort of mitigate the kind of religious ideology which appears to be building currently. The other thing that I wanted to point to stress deals with the current fate of Salafism. I think it's interesting to see that a number of the leaders are being are in a quest of they were busy appearing to be authentic before, and now they want to appear as respectable. And this is something which is really being favored by regional actors, and I think it will have quite significant repercussions in the future to actually integrate them in the political field, which has both positive and negative dimensions, because having them in the political field can mean that some people will regard them as sort of traitors or people who are not pure enough anymore. But I think it's really significant that they are, being pushed as respectable actors, and this is probably something to look at.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Nadwa. Yeah.
Yeah, one important thing about the Salafis, and last summer I did an extensive research on the Salafi groups in the West Coast and the South that are, that are backed by the UAE, that are fighting on the, kind of anti-Houthi bloc. Only the leaders are Salafis. The members are largely 98% are ordinary Southerners who are not Salafis. So I think the problem of militarizing the Salafis is kind of overblown. And I agree with with what Laurent just said. With the Houthis, I think saying that they are anti-imperialist with the political agenda has some truth, but it's not entirely accurate. Houthis' discourse is heavily religious. If you look at most of what comes out of Houthi leaders' statements, videos, media, propaganda over the past year, particularly over the past couple of months towards Mareb, it's heavily religious. Their battle in Mareb is against atheists, and they're fighting the Jews in Mareb. And if they pick up rock, there will be Jews underneath that rock. I would say 10% of what they say is anti-imperialism, but only because I think, their allies in the region are anti-America. But 90% of their discourse towards their internal, opponents is heavily religious. And people talk about, sectarianism and how, the incorporation of Salafis and the kind of radical, whatever Sunni groups is creating sectarianism, but it's actually Houthis who started sectarianism, because when they moved to Bayda in 2014 and took Bayda, they labeled their opponents as ISIS. So and when they went there, they installed in every place, they installed their own preachers, and they forced their slogan on the local people. And so that triggered a reaction, which is extreme. So I think it goes both ways. And I think to only blame the Saudis and the Salafis and the Sunni groups for instigating sectarianism because they have a religious anti-Houthi sentiment is only one side of the picture. And I think we need to look at what the Houthi discourse as well.
Thank you. Stephen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, Noel, if you'd let me say something, I'd like to hear what Luca would say in response, and maybe Ahmed and Laurent as well, if you could, and Manuel as well, if you could come back in, Manuel. But everybody knows that the sectarian issue was not prominent in Yemen, right? I would say, 2014, even the beginning of the war in 2015, it really wasn't an issue. But the problem is that the longer the conflict goes on, right, the more grievances there are on the ground, the feelings harden. And so the risk is that these ideologies rooted in sectarian identities will harden over time, right? There's no way that Yemen, we all know, the 1990s and the 2000s, Yemen wasn't Iraq or Lebanon, right? These sectarian identities were just not important. But I think there's a risk, right, that as the conflict plays out, if it continues long term, that you're going to see the importation of that kind of ideology from the northern part of the Muslim world in a very dangerous way into Aden that I think will continue to drive the conflict. Look, if it could have been resolved 2 years ago, a year ago, I think we could all imagine that easily you could go back to a kind of non-sectarian politics within Yemen. The risk is higher today. Obviously, if the fighting keeps going for another 2 to 3 years, I think that it's even higher. What I want to ask Luca, and then as I said, the others, maybe you could address this. When you distinguish Jarudi from that element of Zaydism that followed the line of Shokani and others, that was much more about reconciling with Shafi in Yemen, how do you evaluate the percentage increase of that thinking and support for sort of Jarudi ideology in the northern regions, has it been, is there evidence that it's been going up and that more Zaidi are buying into that way of thinking, and that there's a risk that that'll become, because it wasn't the dominant trend in the past. Shokani's ideas were much more common among Zaidi.
Luca, yeah.
Oh, yes. So firstly, I'd like to say that I completely agree with Nadwa. The Houthi anti-imperialist discourse is completely phrased in religious terms. So whenever they say that they are opposing the United States of America, they would also say that they are opposing the Christians or the Jewish lobbies behind the government in the United States of America. And whenever they say that they are opposing Israel, even when they use the term Sahiyuni, Zionists, indeed, they also refer to the Jews. But I think that somehow the English word sectarianism is confusing in a sense, because we are using it both to cover the religious language that the Houthis are using for groups that they consider outside of their religion, like the Christians and the Jews. And the same term is used to describe the internal factions of one religion. So in Arabic, for instance, we would talk about madhabiyya to distinguish these internal fractures between different schools of the Islamic religion. But in English, we didn't have a word to talk about that. So the Houthi discourse is inherently religious, yes, even when it's anti-imperialist. Talking about the Jarudi school and the percentage of moderate Zaidis in the north, this goes back to my previous discourse. What I meant to say is that given that the Houthis are referring to a wide number of topics, and some of these topics are political, even though phrased in religious terms, some of the people in the north, they are just buying the political part of their discourse. Some other people, instead, they are adopting their sectarian discourse or their esoteric discourse. And there are many degrees. I even heard people saying that Abdul Malik al-Houthi would be the Mahdi, the hidden Imam. I even heard, right, I've seen people saying that Sunni believers, whenever they use the Dhamma while praying or they say Amin, they are not Muslims. Okay, and this is not typical of the Zaidi school, of course, but I don't even know if it's typical of the Jarudi school. I mean, this is a way of turning other Muslim believers into infidels, kuffar. I don't know how widespread is this way of thinking right now in northern Yemen. I'm afraid that somehow this way of thinking was, yes, strengthened by the fact that some of the Houthi supporters have this kind of mindset.
Anybody else want to comment?
Just to address the question coming from Stephen. I think there is the difference between Jarudiyya and Sulaymaniya, which is related to Shawkani, is related to the vision of the head of Ummah or al-Imam. According to Jarudiyya school, they said it should be from the prophetic family. It should be Hashimi. So this is something important, and that's why actually the Abdul Malik al-Houthi and his family is trying actually to be in this line, because this has given them superpower. And on the other side, for Shawkani, it's, as you mentioned, it's near to Shafi'i school, and so many actually Zaidi imams in Yemen said no, Shawkani is just trying to bring the Zaidi school to be a part of a Shafi'i school, and he is not Zaidi anymore. And this is actually something not new in Yemen. There are so many actually disputes between the two schools over the past century. And the other point related to how this kind of religious vision created common, let's say, common ground of collaboration between Zaidi Jarudi and Shia 12ers, because they have the same similarities. And from here, we can understand why today in Yemen, because of the conflict and because of the Iranian influence, there are huge, actually, Iranian ideas among the Zaydi communities. And we cannot sometimes distinguish what is Zaydi and what is coming from the Shia 12ers, because they are the same. And they are actually trying to foster this kind of religious concepts. And I think by time pass, we will have the same let's say the same version of some groups in Iraq and some groups in Lebanon and in Yemen, because we are seeing transformation of Zaydi school to be a part of Shiite school.
Actually, in Iraq, you will see the Houthis conducting quite a lot of outreach in the shrines, essentially making the case that they have rejoined the wider 12er community and highlighting the fact that they are celebrating Al-Qadir and making it, celebrating that in Sana'a. And, people will come up quite excitedly and take the view that they have switched path, as it were. So interestingly, it's a quiet component of their diplomacy that they make more ground with than they used to.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, this has been really good, Noel.
Yeah.
If you want to bring the meeting to
I think we better, yes, we reached 4:30. Clearly, the lesson for the next time is 3 questions. It's going to be the 4th question we can deal with next time, because it's really about the peace prospects for Yemen. It's perhaps best dealt with in international context. But personally, I mean, I listening to this, I thought it was fascinating and a sort of discussion I've not heard anywhere else. So I think we are making a contribution, and I hope that the people who are seeing this video will think that we have.